My mother's crystal glass shattered against the table, red wine splashing across the white linen like blood spilling from a wound. And in that moment, her voice cut sharper than the glass itself. "You're dead to me, Julia." The room went still, the clinking of silverware dying mid-air, the Christmas lights blinking like they couldn't decide whether to keep shining or give up altogether. My father looked at his plate. My sister hid a smirk behind her napkin. And I realized this wasn't a family dinner. It was my public execution. The woman who'd built her life on appearances had just destroyed mine in front of everyone she wanted to impress. If you're enjoying this, please subscribe and share. Your support keeps the stories coming. I sat there, frozen for a second, trying to swallow the humiliation that tasted like copper and regret. The air felt tight, suffocating, heavy with perfume and judgment. It wasn't the first time Eleanor Collins had tried to control me through shame, but it was the first time I saw the cracks in her porcelain perfection. My boyfriend Ethan had made the mistake of being proud of me, announcing that I'd been offered a senior editor position in Portland, a career leap I'd worked a decade for, writing late nights while my mother dismissed journalism as gossip with grammar. The silence that followed his words had been deafening. Then came her declaration, cold and final, like a judge sentencing me without appeal. "If you leave Vermont, you're no longer my daughter." The guests shifted uncomfortably, pretending to sip from empty glasses, but no one dared interrupt Eleanor. Even my father didn't lift his eyes. I wanted him to speak, to defend me, to say something that proved I wasn't crazy for feeling small all these years. But he stayed motionless, the obedient husband who'd built his peace on silence. I folded my napkin slowly, every movement deliberate, because if I didn't move carefully, I'd crumble. I felt Ethan's hand brush mine under the table, a quiet reminder that I wasn't completely alone. Then I stood. "Merry Christmas, Mother," I said, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. The snow outside called to me, cold and honest, unlike the warmth of this house that demanded I suffocate to belong. When I stepped outside, the air bit at my cheeks, and I exhaled for the first time in years. I didn't know it then, but that walk down the Collins driveway marked the death of the woman my mother tried to own. The snowflakes melted against my skin like fragments of forgiveness I didn't yet believe I deserved. The next morning, my phone buzzed with messages. Clara's smug text, "You really made a scene last night. Mom's heartbroken. You should apologize." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. I didn't owe them an apology for wanting a life. The house felt emptier than usual, maybe because I was finally seeing it for what it was. A museum of perfection curated by a woman terrified of being ordinary. Every photo frame was straight, every flower arranged like a promise that everything was fine. But it wasn't. It had never been. I packed my suitcase quietly, the hum of the radiator the only witness. Each folded shirt felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Ethan offered to help, but I told him no. I needed to do this with my own hands. The drive to Burlington was silent. Snow swept across the highway like a curtain closing between two acts of the same play. When I reached my apartment, I didn't cry. I just sat there, listening to the heater kick on and off, realizing I didn't know who I was without her voice in my head telling me who to be. I opened an old journal from college, the one she'd once called a waste of paper. Inside were pages of dreams I'd buried under her approval. My handwriting was younger, braver. There were lists of things I wanted to do before 30, travel alone, publish a story that mattered, fall in love without asking permission. I hadn't done half of them. I'd been too busy living for Eleanor's smile, a smile that meant I was safe, accepted, not one of her disappointments. That night, Ethan came over with takeout and silence. He didn't try to fix it, didn't offer hollow encouragements, just sat beside me, letting me exist in the quiet. That's when I broke down, not from sadness, but from the exhaustion of always being the good daughter. The next day, I found myself writing, not an article, not a story for anyone else, just words that felt like breathing again. paragraph after paragraph of things I'd never said aloud, how her compliments were currency, how her disapproval was punishment, how her love was a leash I'd mistaken for safety. I wrote until dawn. The pages filled with truth I'd been too afraid to face. When I reread them, I saw patterns, moments that didn't seem connected before, now aligned like clues in a mystery I'd been living blindfolded. Every decision I thought was mine had her fingerprints on it. The debate team I quit because she said it made me sound argumentative. The college major I switched because journalism wasn't respectable. Even the friends I'd lost touch with because she called them unrefined. It wasn't coincidence, it was control disguised as guidance. And I'd let it happen because I thought love was something you earned through obedience. As I traced those old memories, I started feeling something I hadn't felt since childhood. Anger. Not the screaming kind, but quiet, precise anger, the kind that makes you see clearly. I realized Eleanor didn't want a daughter. She wanted a mirror. And I'd been reflecting her fears back at her for 31 years. That's when I decided I couldn't just leave her house. I had to leave her narrative. I called Dr. Klein, a trauma specialist a colleague had recommended months ago when I wrote an article on generational control. I deleted the number back then thinking therapy was for people who couldn't handle life. Now I understood. Handling life wasn't the same as living it. Dr. Klein's assistant booked me for Thursday afternoon. The waiting made me restless, so I threw myself into preparing for Portland, contacting the paper, arranging temporary housing, researching neighborhoods. For every email I sent, I imagined Eleanor's disapproval, and for the first time, it didn't scare me. It fueled me. Still, the silence from my family lingered like a bruise I couldn't stop touching. No apology, no message, just absence, the punishment she always promised if I disobeyed. A week later, I got a package, my mother's handwriting on the label. Inside was the dress I'd worn to Clara's engagement dinner 2 years ago, neatly folded with a note pinned to the collar. For your interviews, if you decide to come to your senses. The manipulation was so elegant, it almost made me laugh. I put the dress in the donation box. The next morning, Ethan called from a photography trip. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Lighter," I said honestly. But that night, lying awake, I wondered if freedom always came with loneliness. Every decision I made now echoed in a kind of quiet I wasn't used to. There was no voice correcting my tone, no judgment hidden in a compliment, no one to impress, just me and the unfamiliar sound of my own approval. I didn't know it yet, but that silence would become the foundation of the life I was about to build. Because control doesn't end when you walk away. It ends when you stop believing you need permission to exist. The snow outside kept falling, soft and relentless, erasing the footprints that led back to the Collins estate. I closed my eyes and let it all disappear. The girl my mother owned was gone, and somewhere in that fading quiet, a new story began to take shape. But I had no idea that before I could start that new chapter, my mother wasn't done with hers. And the next time she reached out, it wouldn't be through anger. It would be something far more dangerous. I spent the days after Christmas in a haze of shock and clarity, replaying my mother's words like a bruise I couldn't stop touching. The sharpness of "you're dead to me" echoing through every quiet hour of the morning. The apartment felt both too small and too vast, the kind of space that made you question whether freedom was a gift or a test. I woke up each day to find snow gathered on the window ledge, soft and deceptive, while inside me a storm brewed that felt anything but gentle. I started to see my life like a timeline marked by every instance my mother had tightened her grip. Subtle manipulations disguised as guidance, criticisms wrapped in concern. Every decision I'd ever made felt tainted by her approval or disapproval, as if my entire existence had been a performance of a stage she directed. The journals scattered across my dining room table became my evidence, my archive of a stolen identity. Each entry I reread pulled back another layer of control I hadn't noticed before, The times I abandoned friendships because they weren't elevating enough. The nights I cried myself to sleep after she called my writing a childish hobby. The way I'd learned to measure my worth by the temperature of her smile. Ethan sat with me most nights, patient and silent, letting me grieve a version of my life that was never really mine. "You know," he said once, tracing the rim of his coffee cup, "you've been investigating other people's truths for years. Maybe it's time you investigated your own." His words lingered long after he'd left for another photography assignment. That was the night I searched for a therapist and found Dr. Klein. The first time we spoke, I was nervous enough that my hands trembled as I adjusted the camera on my laptop. Her office looked soft and steady through the screen. Cream walls, a bookshelf crowded with old titles, and a faint hum of classical music in the background. "You've lived under control for so long," she said after I recounted the Christmas dinner. "You mistake fear for structure and silence for peace." The words hit me like a revelation. I'd spent my entire life confusing obedience with love. "She built me to be perfect," I said quietly, "and when I wasn't, she broke me." Dr. Klein smiled gently. "No, Julia, she didn't build you, she built a mirror. Now you're finally breaking it." For the first time, someone said it out loud, that my mother's power wasn't strength. It was insecurity dressed in expensive clothes. I began writing again, not articles, but confessions, pages of truth I'd buried for decades. The words poured out faster than I could type, each paragraph a rebellion. I wrote about my father's silence, how his conflict avoidance had turned into complicity, how Clara had been trained to enforce our mother's rules, the perfect daughter who smiled prettily while policing my choices. Dr. Klein called it intergenerational programming, but to me, it felt like a family curse. "You can break it," she said during one session, her tone steady and sure, "but breaking means bleeding first." And she was right, because the first time my phone rang with my mother's name flashing across the screen, I felt my stomach twist with both fear and defiance. I almost didn't answer, almost, but I did, if only to hear what weapon she would use next. "Julia," she began, her voice clipped, her tone deceptively calm, "I've been thinking. You're overreacting. Come home and we'll talk about this properly." I could almost see her standing in her pristine kitchen, manicured nails tapping the counter, rehearsing the performance of maternal concern. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, forcing my voice steady. "I'm moving to Portland." A pause followed, a small, dangerous silence. "Don't be ridiculous. You're not throwing away your inheritance, your reputation for some vanity title." My pulse quickened, but I held my ground. "It's not vanity, it's purpose." Her scoff sliced through the line. "Purpose doesn't pay the bills, darling. The Observer would have given you a promotion eventually. All you ever needed was patience and discipline." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. "You mean obedience." Another pause. "You're sounding ungrateful," she said coldly. "Everything you have, your education, your opportunities came from this family." I almost told her that the only thing I'd inherited was trauma, but I bit it back. Instead, I said, "Then maybe it's time I start earning my own life." She hung up before I could finish the sentence. My hands were shaking when I set the phone down, but the trembling wasn't fear. It was power rediscovering its pulse. I spent the following week preparing for the move, boxing my books, canceling utilities, writing farewell emails to colleagues who didn't know the full story. Ethan helped whenever he could, showing up with takeout and quiet encouragement. One night as we labeled boxes, he said, "Do you think she'll ever forgive you?" I taped another box shut before answering. "I don't need her forgiveness. I need my freedom." Still, the guilt came in waves. Late at night, I'd dream of her house, warm lights glowing in perfect symmetry, the smell of pine candles, and the sound of her voice calling my name with that sharp edge of disapproval. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, feeling both liberated and lost. Dr. Klein said it was normal. She explained, freedom always feels like grief at first because you're mourning the illusion of love. That sentence haunted me for days. It made me realize how often I'd chosen pain over peace just to feel connected. One morning I found Clara's name blinking on my phone. I hesitated before answering. "Julia," she said, her voice tight. "Mom's been crying for days. You should apologize before this gets worse." I almost laughed. Worse? She told me I was dead to her. "You know she didn't mean it," Clara said quickly, but even through the phone I could hear the strain in her voice. "She's just hurt." I corrected. "She's angry she lost control. That's not the same thing." "You're being dramatic," Clara said, the same way Mom always had when I dared to speak truth. "You think the world revolves around your little feelings, but Mom's done everything for us." "No, Clara," I said quietly. "She did everything for her image." There was silence, then a sharp exhale. "You've changed." "Good," I replied, because staying the same was killing me. She hung up, and I knew it wasn't just the end of a conversation. It was the collapse of the last bridge connecting me to that house of mirrors. Days later, Ethan came over with 2 tickets to Portland and a bottle of cheap champagne. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. But as the bubbles rose and burst, a strange dread crept in. Breaking the cycle meant more than just moving states. It meant rewriting the entire script of who I was supposed to be. The night before the move, I opened my last journal. On the final page, I wrote, "This is the first decision that's truly mine." Then I closed it and left it on the table like a tombstone marking the end of a long and visible war. The next morning, I loaded the last of my boxes into the car. Snow was falling again, soft and relentless, just like it had on Christmas night. As I fastened my seatbelt, my phone buzzed. "Mom." I hesitated. My heart told me to ignore it. My curiosity told me to listen. I pressed answer. Her voice was trembling this time. Not sharp, not cold, but uncertain. "Julia, please," she said, "don't do this." I closed my eyes, the weight of every memory pressing down like frost on glass. "I already did. You'll regret this. You'll regret walking away from family. Maybe, but I'll regret never trying to be myself more." I ended the call before she could answer, then started the car. As the tires crunched over snow and the house faded from view, I felt something crack, not in me, but around me. The shell of control, the invisible chain of obligation, it splintered into pieces that scatter like ice in the sun. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was finally going somewhere. The highway opened ahead, endless and white. I turned up the radio, the music flooding the silence. Ethan reached over, took my hand, and smiled. "You okay?" he asked, eyes fixed on the road. I nodded. "Ask me again when we get there." But even as I said it, I knew something was coming, something that would test the fragile freedom I'd just begun to taste. Because that night, long after we arrived in Portland and unpacked the last box, a single email arrived in my inbox. The sender's name froze my breath mid-air, Eleanor Collins, and the subject line read, "You've made a terrible mistake." The email sat in my inbox like a ghost that refused to vanish. The subject line frozen in all caps, "You've made a terrible mistake." And for a long time, I just stared at it. I could almost hear her voice through the screen, sharp and polished, as if she dictated every word to maintain the illusion of control. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, but I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it would say. how ungrateful I was, how reckless, how she'd given me everything only for me to throw it away for a man and a dream that would crumble. But the difference now was that I no longer needed to defend myself. For the first time in my life, my silence was stronger than her words. Ethan came into the room quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee, and when he saw the glow of the laptop on my face, he didn't ask what was wrong. He knew. He just set the mug beside me and said softly, "She doesn't get to own you anymore, Jules." His voice grounded me, pulling me out of the old reflex that always made me shrink at confrontation. I shut the laptop, took a breath that felt like reclaiming oxygen after years underwater, and said, "She already doesn't." We left Vermont 2 weeks later. The snow followed us halfway down the highway, flakes clinging to the windscreen like memories that refused to melt. By the time we reached Portland, the air smelled of rain and ocean salt. The city felt alive, imperfect, unfiltered, and utterly free. I found a small apartment downtown with creaky, but healing never moves in straight lines. One afternoon, I came home to find a letter waiting at my door, handwritten with my mother's looping cursive and expensive stationery, as if she'd bled money onto the page to remind me of what I'd lost. I almost threw it away. Almost. But curiosity won. Inside, she wrote not with rage, but pity. "Julia, I forgive you for this phase. When you realize what you've given up, my door will always be open." There it was again. The poison, disguised as kindness. I folded the letter once, twice, and slipped it into the kitchen drawer where I kept old receipts. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because throwing it away would mean she still had the power to provoke me. A month later, my first major feature went live, a long-form piece on generational perfectionism and the silent trauma it breeds. It was personal, raw, and written with the precision of someone dissecting her own scars. The article exploded online. Emails poured in from readers who saw themselves in every paragraph. Mothers who admitted they'd become their parents. Daughters who whispered that they finally felt seen. Dana called me into her office the next morning, her eyes bright behind her glasses. "It's brilliant," she said. "You've started something real here." I nodded, but inside I felt a strange ache. Not pride, but something deeper, older. That night, I received another message from Eleanor. Short this time. "So this is what you've become, someone who profits off private pain. How humiliating for us all." I laughed, actually laughed out loud, because for once, her shame wasn't mine to carry. I typed back 2 sentences. "It's not humiliation, it's truth, and it's mine." Then I hit send and blocked her number. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was freedom, echoing through every corner of my life. Ethan and I celebrated with cheap wine and takeout noodles on the floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and laughter. For the first time, my future didn't feel like something to earn. It felt like something to live. Months later, I returned to Vermont, not out of guilt, but closure. My sister Clara met me at the door, surprise flickering across her perfect face. She'd always been the golden one, the echo of my mother's reflection. "She's not here," Clara said quickly, as if that would stop me. "She's at the club." I smiled. "That's fine." I walked past her into the house that used to feel like a cage and now felt strangely small. The walls gleamed, the air smelled like lilies and polish, unchanged, unmoved, unreal. I walked into the dining room and saw the table set for 12, silver gleaming, candles unlit. The same table where she declared me dead to her. For a moment, the memories rose like smoke. Every correction, every cold glance, every word that chipped at my sense of worth. But instead of breaking, I felt steady. I placed a single envelope on her pristine plate. Inside was a printed copy of my article, the one that had made national headlines. The title read, "The Price of Perfection: How Generations Lose Themselves in the Pursuit of Control." At the bottom, I had handwritten just one line: "Some ghosts never leave until you stop feeding them." Then I turned and walked out, my heels echoing across marble floors that once swallowed my voice. As I stepped outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow. I tilted my face toward the sky, letting it melt against my skin. My phone buzzed once. Ethan, waiting in the car. I looked back at the house one last time. It wasn't anger that filled me, or even triumph. It was peace, because I finally understood. Freedom isn't running away from what broke you. It's walking straight through it and realizing it can't touch you anymore. I climbed into the car, took Ethan's hand, and smiled. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, more than ever. As we drove away, I didn't check the rearview mirror. For the first time in 31 years, I wasn't leaving something behind. I was going home, to myself.